Saad was unlike any other girl in the royal palace. From the moment she could speak, her voice carried a rare clarity, a melodic purity that could stir the hearts of those who heard it. Even the palace guards, usually stern and unflinching, would pause in their routines to listen when Saad hummed a tune or recited a simple poem. Her presence, though quiet, was luminous, drawing the attention of visitors and the gentle notice of the queen herself. She possessed not only beauty but a kindness that was both gentle and unwavering. Saad had grown up within the marble walls of the palace, though not as a princess. She was the daughter of a palace musician and a healer, two individuals deeply respected for their skill but who carried no claim to royal favor. Her father, known for playing the kora with a soulful resonance, taught her the importance of listening before speaking, of letting one's actions echo louder than words. Her mother instilled in her a compassion that reached even the most overlooked servants, teaching her that true strength came not from power but from understanding and empathy. Saada's upbringing was humble yet rich in lessons of moral courage, resilience, and the beauty of human connection. From a young age, Saada's voice had made her stand out. In the bustling corridors of the palace, where servants hurried about their tasks and courtiers whispered their intrigues, she could be heard softly singing to herself, her notes threading through the shadows. It was said that even the tapestries seemed to shimmer when her melodies floated nearby, as if acknowledging the innocence and purity of her song. Yet with admiration came envy. Jealousy, like a shadow, began to gather among the courtiers who were accustomed to commanding attention and reverence. They saw in Saad a potential rival for recognition and favor, someone whose talents could overshadow their own carefully cultivated influence. The palace was a complex web of hierarchy and rivalry. Each servant, guard, and courtier had a place and a role, but ambition often blurred the lines between duty and desire. Those who had spent years climbing the social ladder could not abide the effortless admiration Saad inspired. Her talent seemed natural, effortless, and free, while their own achievements required constant assertion and meticulous maneuvering. To them, Saada's goodness was a threat, her talent a provocation. They whispered behind closed doors, questioning whether a girl so young and unassuming could hold sway over the hearts of the palace's inhabitants, whether she might disrupt the delicate balance of control they had worked so hard to maintain. Despite the envy around her, Saad remained untainted by bitterness. She greeted every servant she met with a smile and every child in the palace corridors with gentle attention. When the cooks in the kitchen struggled with the weight of their tasks, she offered help, carrying bundles of herbs or fetching water without complaint. To the guards, she was a calming presence, a reminder of innocence amid the rigid discipline they enforced. Even the courtiers who despised her could not help but feel an unacknowledged admiration when they observed her small acts of kindness or the way she treated the animals of the palace gardens with patient care. Her uniqueness was not only in her voice but in her perspective. Saad saw the palace not merely as a place of rules and rank but as a community of people, each carrying their own burdens and aspirations. She spoke to the kitchen maids about their dreams, listened to the gardeners' stories of distant villages, and shared quiet laughter with the stable hands. In her presence, people felt seen in a way that transcended titles and status. She held a rare ability to draw out the best in others, to make them recognize their own worth and potential. This trait, however, only deepened the envy of those who sought to maintain superiority through fear and manipulation. It was inevitable, given the nature of palace life, that whispers would turn into schemes. Some courtiers began planting seeds of doubt in the minds of the queen's attendants, suggesting that Saada's charm was dangerous, that her influence might inspire insubordination among the lower ranks. They claimed that a girl with such sway, if left unchecked, could embolden others to challenge the established order, threatening the delicate balance of power. Though baseless, these whispers spread like wildfire, adding tension to the palace air and casting shadows over Saada's otherwise bright existence. Yet Saad remained blissfully unaware of the magnitude of envy surrounding her. She spent her days as she always had, singing softly while completing her chores, sharing a kind word here, a helping hand there. Her heart, untouched by malice, radiated an authenticity that drew people to her without coercion. Children would follow her through the palace corridors, imitating her songs and laughter. Even the animals seemed to recognize a gentle spirit in her presence, nuzzling against her and responding to her melodies. There was something in the very essence of Saad that resisted the darkness of envy, something innate that could not be tarnished by the scheming of others. As Saad matured, her talents continued to grow. Her voice evolved from simple songs into complex melodies that could evoke tears, laughter, or wonder with equal ease. When she sang during communal meals, the once bustling and noisy dining halls would fall silent, captivated by the purity of her tone. Servants paused in their work, guards lowered their heads in respect, and even the most cynical courtiers could not deny the spellbinding effect of her presence. Sada's voice became a quiet force, a subtle yet undeniable power that emanated from her very being, leaving those around her both enchanted and, for some, unsettled. Her demeanor, too, reflected a wisdom beyond her years. Sad had a calmness in her movements, a patience in her speech, and an understanding that seemed almost supernatural. She noticed small injustices that others overlooked, offering comfort and support in ways that did not demand recognition. Her empathy extended beyond humans to the natural world, with birds perching near her window and flowers turning toward her when she approached. The palace, a place of rigid order and strict discipline, seemed to soften around her presence, as if acknowledging a harmony that many could not articulate. Despite all this, jealousy continued to simmer. The courtiers' plots became more deliberate, more cunning. They observed her interactions, dissecting every smile, every glance, and interpreting them through the lens of insecurity. Rumors were spread about her intentions, stories fabricated to incite fear and suspicion. They attempted to isolate her, to diminish her influence, yet every act of scheming seemed to strengthen her quiet resilience. Saad, though unaware of the full extent of the plots, began to sense that her presence was stirring emotions she could not yet name, a mixture of fear, admiration, and envy that lingered like a shadow in the palace corridors. Even amidst this tension, Sada's heart remained uncorrupted. She continued to treat every person she met with dignity, whether they were allies or enemies. Her kindness became her armor, her empathy her strength. Those who attempted to undermine her found that their malice was often deflected by the simplicity of her goodness, unable to take root in a heart so steadfast. This rare combination of talent, kindness, and quiet power created a magnetic aura around her, a presence that could not be ignored even when those around her tried desperately to do so. The palace, with its marble halls, intricately carved furniture, and vibrant tapestries, became both a stage and a testing ground for Sada's emerging influence. She navigated it with grace, never seeking attention but never shying from the light it shone upon her. Her steps were measured, her voice steady, and her gaze gentle yet perceptive. Every encounter, every song, every gesture contributed to the subtle weaving of her presence into the fabric of palace life. In a place where envy and power struggles often dictated the fates of the innocent, Sada's essence began to shine as a quiet, undeniable force. In the end, Sada's introduction to palace life was not merely about her position or her talents. It was about the way she existed as a beacon of authenticity, resilience, and innate goodness. Her story, even before any trials had begun, was already setting the stage for the conflicts, wonders, and revelations to come. The envy she attracted, the admiration she inspired, and the subtle influence she wielded would all converge into the extraordinary tale of a girl whose voice could not be silenced, whose presence could not be diminished, and whose heart remained unyieldingly kind in a world that often prized power over virtue. As Sada's presence in the palace grew, so too did the unease among those who had long thrived on control and hierarchy. Courtiers who had spent years carefully weaving networks of influence began to feel an unfamiliar sting of insecurity. They watched, with increasing resentment, as servants, guards, and even minor officials gravitated toward Sada's warmth and charm. What had once been small murmurs of admiration became a source of fear that a girl of no noble birth could overshadow their carefully cultivated authority. The seeds of envy sprouted in whispered conversations behind intricately carved doors. "Did you see how the cooks hang on her every word?" one courtier would murmur to another in the dimly lit corridors. "A girl, and yet she commands attention that should belong to us." Another would reply, frowning, "Her voice, it reaches even the queen's ears. It's dangerous. If we allow this to continue, we risk losing influence over the palace entirely." The discussions were subtle, never overt, but their implications were clear. Saad must be checked. Sabotage began in small, almost imperceptible ways. Servants noticed their tools misplaced after performing chores near Sada's quarters. Messages intended for her would go missing, or food would be delayed, creating the illusion of neglect. Courtiers whispered of imaginary mistakes, painting her actions as clumsy or careless. The intent was not merely to inconvenience her but to create doubt, to tarnish her reputation quietly, like a slow poison seeping into the minds of those who admired her. The envy manifested not only in logistics but in social maneuvering. Jealous courtiers began to subtly isolate Saad during gatherings. Invitations to private meetings would accidentally fail to reach her, leaving her on the periphery of palace discussions. They whispered in hallways when she passed by, ensuring that her reputation as a humble and kind-hearted girl was shadowed by innuendo and suspicion. Each smile from a rival carried a hidden menace. Each casual greeting was layered with a subtle attempt to unsettle her. Even the queen's attendants, who had once quietly admired Sada's charm, began to receive hints of caution from their superiors. "Do not trust her too easily," a senior attendant would warn a younger one. "Remember, appearances can be deceiving. That girl is clever, but cleverness without caution can be dangerous." Though the words were careful, the intent was unmistakable. Sad was to be watched, her growing influence curtailed, and any misstep magnified. The rivalry reached its peak in moments that seemed innocuous to outsiders but carried immense weight within the palace. A music recital, where Sad had previously enthralled guards and officials alike, became a testing ground. Rival musicians deliberately missed cues, and the lighting was adjusted poorly to distract her. Servants were subtly encouraged to fidget, making the room feel tense and unwelcoming. These acts were designed to make her falter publicly, to allow a single moment of imperfection to be broadcasted as proof of inadequacy. Yet Saad, resilient as ever, remained largely untroubled by these covert attacks. She moved through the palace with grace, responding with kindness even when mischief or subtle sabotage threatened her composure. Her calmness became a quiet frustration to her rivals. Their plans often failed not due to lack of cunning, but because her heart and mind were steady, impervious to the petty manipulations meant to unsettle her. Every act of envy, every whispered plan, seemed to reinforce her inner strength rather than weaken it. Still, the palace air grew heavy with tension. The jealousy of her rivals was a living thing, twisting and spreading through the halls. Courtiers began to align themselves into factions, some reluctantly admiring her, others seething with the belief that she must be subdued. Even the younger palace guards, easily swayed by peer pressure, began to question whether Sada's influence was a threat to the order they had been trained to uphold. The subtle war of whispers and glances created an atmosphere where every movement, every glance, every note of her song could be interpreted as an assertion of power. Saad, despite her awareness of subtle changes in how people reacted around her, remained focused on her purpose: to continue her duties with integrity, to sing when her heart called, and to extend kindness to all who needed it. She had learned early from her parents that cruelty and envy could never touch the heart that chose compassion over resentment. Her rivals, in their plotting and scheming, underestimated this fundamental strength. They believed influence could only be controlled through manipulation and fear, yet Sada's quiet authenticity proved an unassailable shield. By the end of these early acts of plotting, the palace had transformed subtly. The corridors carried an undertone of whispered suspicion. Even ordinary tasks were now punctuated with cautious observation. The envious courtiers' schemes, though carefully executed, were creating cracks in their own credibility. Each failed attempt to diminish Sada's reputation became another small victory for her unseen strength. In the midst of jealousy, she remained a beacon of grace and resilience, her reputation quietly flourishing even as the seeds of envy grew louder among those who wished her harm. The moment came without warning. Saad had been attending to her usual duties in the palace when a group of envious courtiers, whispering amongst themselves, quietly approached her. Their steps were deliberate, their faces masks of false concern, but the glint of malice in their eyes betrayed their true intentions. Before she could comprehend the unfolding plot, they grabbed her arms firmly yet carefully enough to avoid drawing attention, guiding her down narrow corridors that she had walked countless times, yet never in this way. A sinking feeling settled in her chest, a premonition of danger she could neither speak nor resist. The corridors themselves seemed to conspire against her. Candles flickered along the walls, casting elongated shadows that danced and twisted like silent specters. The air grew cooler, heavier, carrying the scent of damp stone and mildew as they descended. Sada's heart pounded, echoing in her chest as if it were the only sound in the silent palace. The walls, which had once felt protective and familiar, now loomed over her like a prison of stone and shadow. When they reached the cellar, the mood shifted further. The heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron bands, creaked open, revealing a space that smelled of rot and dust. The faint light from the corridor barely touched the corners of the room, leaving them shrouded in impenetrable darkness. The courtiers shoved her gently but firmly inside. Panic rose in Sada's chest as she stumbled forward, her bare feet brushing against cold, uneven stone. The door slammed behind her with a deafening thud, the sound echoing ominously through the confined space. Alone in the darkness, Saad felt a surge of fear unlike anything she had known. Her breaths came in shallow, rapid gasps, each echoing back to her in the silent room. Every corner seemed to hide some unseen threat, every shadow a potential danger. The cold stone beneath her knees pressed uncomfortably, and the air was thick and musty, filled with the smell of damp earth and forgotten time. The cellar, meant to be out of sight, out of mind, became her entire world. She ran her fingers along the rough walls, seeking comfort or familiarity, finding only the cold, rough surface that offered no reassurance. The isolation weighed on her as heavily as the damp air. In the palace above, laughter, music, and voices continued without her, creating a cruel juxtaposition to her own imprisonment. Each muffled sound reminded her of what she had been torn from: the light, the human connection, the simple joy she had once known. Fear twisted with sorrow, and she closed her eyes, trying to summon strength from the memories of her childhood, the lessons her parents had taught her about resilience and courage. Even as fear enveloped her, a small ember of defiance began to glow within her. The courtiers' intentions were clear. They wished not only to isolate her physically but to break her spirit, to render her powerless and voiceless. Their cruelty had no need for justification. It existed solely to satisfy their envy. Yet Sada's mind, though shaking, refused to yield. She recalled the countless times she had faced adversity with quiet grace, the small victories of kindness that had earned her respect among the palace staff. Though she was now trapped, she vowed that her spirit would not be confined by walls of stone or the malice of others. Hours stretched endlessly. The cellar, though small, seemed to expand in her imagination, each corner a cavern of fear. Tiny insects scuttled in the shadows, their presence a reminder of the unclean environment into which she had been thrust. Hunger and thirst, though minor in comparison to the psychological weight of confinement, began to gnaw at her. Each small sound from above, the occasional footstep or distant voice, heightened her awareness and the tension in her body. Every minute became a test of patience and endurance, a trial designed to wear her down. Sada's mind wandered to the courtiers who had imprisoned her. She imagined their whispered conversations, the satisfaction they would feel at her presumed helplessness. She understood that their cruelty was not born of necessity but envy, and yet that realization brought little comfort. They sought to erase her presence, to silence her voice, and she felt the weight of their intentions pressing upon her even in this solitary confinement. And yet, amidst the fear and isolation, Sada's unique inner strength began to emerge. She remembered her voice, her one gift that had captivated the palace. Even though her lips could not sing aloud in the suffocating darkness, the memory of sound brought her comfort. She hummed softly in the shadows, a private melody that reminded her of herself, of her identity and resilience. It was a quiet rebellion, a refusal to let the darkness claim her. By the time the first faint light of dawn seeped through the tiny cracks above, Sad had settled into a rhythm of endurance. The initial panic had waned, replaced by a wary determination. The cellar was no longer simply a place of fear. It had become a crucible, shaping her patience and reinforcing her inner strength. Though she longed for freedom, she knew that the day would come when she would emerge, and that when she did, the power she had nurtured within these stone walls would be unstoppable. Even in the damp, shadowed cellar, Sada's spirit glowed. Though the courtiers believed her silenced, her resolve whispered in the darkness, a quiet prelude to the echoing power her voice would soon command from the throne room itself. In the suffocating darkness of the cellar, Sada's first instinct had been panic. The shadows pressed in on her from all sides, the air was thick and heavy, and every creak of the old wooden door above made her heart race. But as the hours stretched into what felt like days, something within her began to shift. Fear, though powerful, could not dominate a spirit tempered by kindness, courage, and an unwavering sense of purpose. Sad knew she had survived challenges before and she would survive this. Her mind wandered back to the lessons her parents had imparted when she was a child. Strength, they had said, is not measured by the absence of fear but by the courage to stand when fear surrounds you. She repeated these words silently, letting them seep into her bones, letting them become a shield against the oppressive gloom. She remembered how, even in the smallest moments, she had faced injustice and cruelty with grace, small acts of kindness, gentle words, and firm resolve that had always guided her. Those memories now became her anchor. Sada's eyes, though closed to avoid imagining the dark corners, visualized light. She imagined the palace gardens where the morning sun kissed the leaves, where the birds sang without concern for the shadows that crept along the walls. These images, though distant, filled her with warmth and reminded her that the world outside was still vibrant and alive. The darkness of the cellar was temporary, It could not claim the sunlight that lived in her mind. She began to focus on her breath, slow and deliberate, grounding herself in the present. Every inhalation was a claim to her existence, every exhalation a release of despair. She whispered small affirmations in the quiet. I am not broken. I'm not forgotten. My voice will rise again. These words, simple but powerful, became a lifeline, a rhythm that steadied her racing heart. Even when the air grew colder and the stone beneath her knees bit into her skin, she clung to this mantra, feeling it strengthen the very core of her being. Memories of her past struggles and triumphs filled her with renewed courage. She remembered the first time she had sung in the palace courtyard, the awe in the eyes of those who had heard her voice, the feeling of light spreading from her heart to those around her. That memory reminded her that she possessed an inner power far greater than the cruelty imposed upon her. It was not merely her voice that mattered, it was the spirit behind it, the resilience, the hope, the unwavering belief in the goodness of life, even in the face of adversity. Saad began to reflect on the nature of her captor's cruelty. The jealousy, the plotting, the desire to silence her, all of it stemmed from weakness, not strength. Their attempts to dominate her through fear would never succeed because true power was not in oppression but in the courage to remain upright when the world sought to bow her down. This understanding transformed her fear into resolve. She was not simply surviving, she was observing, learning, and preparing. Every moment in the darkness became training for the day she would rise, a rehearsal for the voice that would echo through the palace walls. Even as hunger gnawed at her and the chill of the stone seeped into her bones, Saad discovered reserves of patience she hadn't known existed. She began to turn the cellar into a place of reflection, imagining the melody she would sing, the words she would speak, the moments when truth and justice would triumph over envy and deceit. In the isolation, she cultivated her thoughts, strengthening her mind as much as her spirit. Every whisper of the wind through the cracks became a companion, every distant sound from above a reminder that the world outside had not forgotten her. Her hope, fragile at first, grew like a flame shielded from the gusts of despair. She realized that confinement could not imprison her inner strength. The darkness might obscure her body, but it could never dim her resolve, her imagination, or the spirit that gave her voice its power. She silently promised herself that when the doors opened, when she returned to the light, she would not only reclaim her place in the palace but transform it with the force of her courage and the purity of her heart. As night deepened, Saad allowed herself to rest, not in surrender but in preparation. Her body might be constrained, but her mind was free to soar. She imagined the day she would walk back into the throne room, not as a frightened girl, but as a young woman whose strength had been forged in darkness. Her fear had been tempered by patience, her despair transformed into determination, her isolation into an unwavering clarity of purpose. By the first rays of dawn, Saad had transformed her confinement into a crucible. The cellar, intended to diminish her, had instead fortified her. Her courage was now a silent, steadfast companion, her hope an unshakable pillar, and her determination, a quiet but unstoppable force. She knew that soon, the echoes of her spirit would not remain confined to the cellar. They would resound through the palace, reverberating in the hearts of all who heard, a testament to the resilience of one who refuses to be broken. The darkness of the cellar had long since become familiar to Saad, yet it also amplified the slightest sound, making every breath, every shift of her body feel monumental. One quiet moment, as she leaned against the cold stone wall, a memory of her voice singing in the palace gardens rose unbidden in her mind. Instinctively, she hummed softly, a thread of melody meant only for herself. At first it was barely audible, a faint vibration in the cellar's heavy air. But then, something extraordinary happened. The stone walls, damp and resonant, seemed to carry her sound, amplifying it beyond the confines of the room. A low, melodic resonance crept upward through the cracks in the floorboards, seeping into the corridors above. It was as if the very architecture of the palace recognized the purity and power in her tone, carrying it outward in waves that seemed to shimmer in the air itself. In the halls above, the palace guards and servants paused in mid-step. A soft murmur of curiosity ran through them. Had someone accidentally dropped a tray, or was a window rattling in the wind? Then the sound intensified. It was unmistakable now, a clear, haunting melody, delicate yet impossibly strong, filling the corridors, echoing off the walls and weaving through the tapestries and ornate furniture. The guards looked at each other, confusion written plainly on their faces. "Where is that coming from?" one whispered, his voice tight with a mix of fear and wonder. Servants hurried from room to room, peering around corners and through open doors, trying to locate the source. The melody was ethereal, almost unreal, and seemed to carry with it a strange power, one that caused the air to vibrate faintly and made the hairs on their arms stand on end. Some shivered involuntarily, while others covered their mouths in astonishment. The whisper spread quickly, moving like wildfire. "Do you hear that? Who could it be? Is it magic?" Even the more skeptical palace staff could not deny the presence of something extraordinary. The voice was not merely a sound, it was a presence, commanding attention without a single step forward. The guards, normally quick to dismiss odd occurrences, exchanged uneasy glances. Their fingers itched toward their weapons, but no one could pinpoint a threat. The sound was everywhere yet nowhere, echoing from beneath their feet as if the palace itself had become a conduit for this mysterious resonance. Back in the cellar, Sod felt the vibrations return to her, flowing through the stones and into her very bones. She had intended her hum to be private, a quiet meditation to calm her mind, but the result was something far greater. She realized with a mixture of awe and cautious excitement, that her voice, her very essence, was no longer confined to her lips. It carried power. It could reach beyond walls, beyond barriers, beyond even those who sought to silence her. She continued to hum, experimenting with the cadence, testing the strength of her voice. The notes traveled with increasing clarity, the echoes growing longer, resonating deeper. Above, the palace staff could now hear individual words and fragments of song, although the melody remained almost hypnotic in its perfection. Some clutched their hearts, caught between fear and wonder, while others felt tears prickling their eyes, inexplicably moved by the purity of the sound. Curiosity overcame fear. Several servants tiptoed closer to the cellar entrance, trying to detect the origin of this haunting voice. The guards, uneasy but intrigued, approached as well, only to find the hallway empty. No door was open, no window ajar, yet the sound persisted, clear and unyielding. They exchanged uncertain glances, murmuring their confusion and astonishment to one another. "Could it be her?" one asked softly, almost afraid to speak the name aloud. Even whispers could not contain the growing awe. Word spread quickly to higher-ranking palace members, who began to gather in the corridors, drawn by the impossible melody. Each listener was struck differently, some with fear, some with reverence, and others with a quiet hope that seemed to settle in their hearts. It was as though the voice carried a message, a promise that justice, power, and truth could not be confined by stone, darkness, or envy. Sod, unaware of the stir she had caused, continued to hum, allowing the notes to flow naturally, each one filled with the strength she had nurtured in her confinement. She could feel the energy rising within her, a combination of her resilience, her longing for justice, and the innate magic of her voice. The cellar was no longer merely a prison, it had become a sanctuary of preparation, a conduit for her growing influence, and a stage upon which her destiny was beginning to unfold. As the melody reverberated through the palace, those who had mocked her or sought to diminish her influence found themselves caught in a whirlwind of awe and unease. The power of Sada's voice was undeniable, echoing from the darkness into the very heart of the throne room. A presence once thought silenced had begun to assert itself in the most impossible of ways, a voice that would soon leave the palace and its inhabitants forever changed. By the end of that first night, the echoes of her song lingered in every hallway and chamber. Guards, servants, and courtiers alike lay awake in wonder and apprehension, the impossible truth settling into their hearts. Sada's voice could not be contained. What had been intended as punishment had become the catalyst for recognition, respect, and the beginning of an extraordinary transformation within the palace itself. By the time the first whispers of Sada's mysterious voice reached the throne room, panic had begun to ripple through the ranks of courtiers. What had started as awe and confusion among the palace staff quickly escalated into outright fear. The echoes of her voice, sweet yet commanding, seemed impossibly powerful, reverberating through the grand hall with a clarity that no ordinary sound could possess. The courtiers exchanged hurried, nervous glances, their polished shoes scraping across the marble as they shuffled to see what had caused such an extraordinary phenomenon. Jealousy, which had long simmered beneath their polished exteriors, now twisted into pure dread. They had spent months plotting to diminish Sada's influence, to silence the girl whose talent and beauty had unsettled them. They had believed locking her away in the dark, damp cellar would end her rising reputation, and yet, here she was, her voice filling the throne room, impossible to ignore, asserting itself with undeniable authority. Each note seemed to challenge their schemes, each echo a reminder of their impotence. A few courtiers raised trembling hands, pointing toward the cellar doors as if expecting to see her appear magically in the open. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with disbelief. Some whispered fervent prayers to the ancestors, hoping the sound would cease, while others muttered accusations of witchcraft, their envy now mingled with genuine fear. The thought that their own petty scheming might have awakened something beyond their understanding was almost too much to bear. The hall, usually a place of controlled etiquette and cold politeness, was now alive with tension. Courtiers stumbled over one another, trying to gauge the source, to locate a tangible explanation for the voice that defied all logic. The music of her echoes was not merely sound, it carried a presence, a force that seemed to press against the walls, sweeping away the delicate airs of hierarchy and status they clung to so tightly. The courtiers felt exposed, their power challenged by a mere girl imprisoned in the dark. One particularly arrogant noble tried to regain composure, straightening his embroidered tunic and clearing his throat. This cannot be real," he stammered, though his eyes betrayed a mixture of terror and fascination. Another, less restrained, leaned close to whisper to his companion, "Surely this is sorcery. There is no other explanation. She has been locked away, how can her voice fill the throne room?" Their words were punctuated by the occasional tremor of the echo itself, which seemed to answer with a haunting, almost playful persistence, reminding them that their control was slipping. Panic spread further as servants and attendants began to murmur among themselves, their voices rising in anxious speculation. "It's as if the walls themselves are singing," one cried. "I swear I feel it vibrating through my bones." Another whispered of omens and ancestral warnings, recalling tales of spirits that had once punished the proud and greedy in the kingdom. The courtiers, normally so confident in their knowledge and authority, were now scrambling to maintain composure, but the growing unease was contagious, infecting even the steely-eyed guards tasked with maintaining order. A few courtiers attempted to assert authority, demanding that the doors to the cellar be opened immediately. They barked commands at the guards, insisting that sod be brought forth so that the source of the echo could be examined and controlled. Yet the guards hesitated, sensing an unseen power in the vibrations that resonated through the marble floors. Something about the voice made even the most loyal and hardened soldiers uneasy, as if it carried the weight of the spirits themselves. The panic intensified as the sound persisted. Courtiers who had been planning Sada's humiliation were now consumed by fear that their plans had backfired. They imagined every step of their prior scheming, each whispered insult, each slanderous rumor, coming to life as a force far beyond their control. The echoing voice seemed to mock their arrogance, challenging their belief that they could dictate fate through fear and manipulation. Amid the chaos, a few of the wiser courtiers paused, considering the possibility that Sada's confinement had revealed something extraordinary, not malevolent. But even they could not suppress the tremor in their hearts. The fear was too visceral, too immediate. The voice that rose from the cellar was no longer just Sada's, it was a symbol of justice, of resilience, and of the power they had so callously underestimated. As minutes stretched into hours, the palace filled with the tension of uncertainty. Courtiers paced, whispered, and clutched their amulets, their panic now mingled with awe. No one could ignore the undeniable truth. The girl they had sought to silence had found a way to transcend the confines of stone, darkness, and cruelty. Her voice was everywhere, and with each echo the courtiers' fear deepened, while the rest of the palace began to sense the coming shift of power. By the end of the day, whispers of Sada's voice had spread even beyond the throne room. Courtiers who had long considered themselves untouchable realized, with mounting dread, that their envy and plots could no longer bind her. The echoes of her song were more than sound. They were a warning, a revelation, and a reminder that true strength cannot be hidden, not even in the darkest cellar. The murmurs of awe and fear that had begun to ripple through the palace could not escape the attention of the queen. She was a woman of sharp intellect and keen observation, accustomed to noticing the smallest disturbances in her court. From the moment the courtiers' whispers reached her ears, she felt a tug of intrigue she could not ignore. Her life, surrounded by protocol and ceremony, had seldom presented mysteries that escaped her notice, yet this voice, so pure, so commanding, was unlike anything she had encountered. At first, she listened from her chambers, the doors slightly ajar, careful not to draw attention to her interest. The echoes of Sada's voice carried through the palace corridors, slipping into her ears like an unexpected melody that refused to be ignored. She paused in her morning routines, the elegant movements of her attendants, the rustle of silk gowns, all fading into the background as the haunting sound enveloped her. Each note seemed to linger longer than physically possible, bouncing from the walls in a way that suggested more than mere acoustics. It hinted at power, presence, and intention. Curiosity ignited, mingled with a quiet wariness. The queen had witnessed talent and charm before, but never had she felt so palpably that a single individual could command not just attention, but the very atmosphere of the palace. She considered the reports, servants' accounts of a voice echoing from the cellar, courtiers trembling in fear, whispers of ancestral blessings and even murmurs of witchcraft. Each report painted Sod as an enigma, and the queen's mind raced to piece together reason from rumor. Her advisors, sensing her interest, approached cautiously. "Your Majesty," one began, bowing low, "there is talk of strange happenings in the palace, voices not bound by walls or doors." Another added, with an undertone of caution, "Some whisper that it may be the girl Sod, confined in the cellar. Her song is said to fill the throne room, even though she is locked away." The queen's brow furrowed, but her eyes gleamed with curiosity rather than fear. She had always believed in observing before acting, in letting events reveal themselves before she intervened. "Bring me accurate accounts," she instructed, her voice steady yet commanding. "I will hear this for myself. We must understand what is happening before drawing conclusions." Her words carried authority, silencing any dissent and reminding the courtiers that while fear ran through the halls, judgment rested firmly in her hands. Later, she moved through the corridors herself, flanked by a few trusted attendants. As she approached the throne room, the echoes grew more pronounced. The voice was no longer a simple sound, it was a presence that filled the space, bending attention and focus, drawing her closer with an almost magnetic force. The queen paused, lifting a hand as if to feel the vibrations in the air, noting the reactions of those around her. The wide-eyed servants, the anxious courtiers, the subtle shifts of those accustomed to hierarchy now confronted with something beyond their comprehension. Her curiosity deepened as she realized the voice was not merely echoing, it was communicating something intangible yet undeniable. There was defiance in it, but also purity, a blend of innocence and authority that demanded recognition without needing to assert dominance. She wondered what sort of person could wield such power unconsciously, and why the palace had not recognized it sooner. The queen's mind raced with possibilities. Could this be a trick of acoustics, some clever device employed by mischievous courtiers? Or was it something far older, a latent spiritual force, perhaps tied to ancestral blessings or ancient rites long forgotten? The palace, with its centuries of tradition and ceremony, had rarely encountered the inexplicable. And yet here it was, tangible and undeniable, pressing against every expectation she had ever held. Determined to uncover the truth, the queen ordered that the cellar be discreetly inspected. Guards were instructed to approach carefully, and trusted servants were sent to observe the girl's confinement without alerting the jealous courtiers who had orchestrated her imprisonment. She wanted first-hand knowledge, not rumors or half-told tales. The investigation, though subtle, marked the beginning of a shift in the palace's perception, from fear and suspicion toward cautious intrigue and respect for a force they could not yet understand. As the queen listened longer, her awe deepened. The sound carried through her very being, stirring long-forgotten memories of tales told in her childhood, stories of spirits, blessings, and powers hidden in the humblest of individuals. The echoes spoke not only to her ears but to her mind, challenging her assumptions about authority, power, and the nature of influence. She realized that Sada's voice, though imprisoned, held a strength that might reshape the palace's understanding of hierarchy, respect, and justice. By evening, the queen convened a private council of advisors, sharing her observations and insisting on a careful, respectful approach to uncovering the truth. "This is no ordinary voice," she said, her tone resolute. "We must understand it before we act rashly. Whatever power dwells within that girl, it deserves our attention, not our scorn." The council, though cautious, could not deny the authority in her words, nor the weight of the phenomenon she described. Thus began a careful investigation, led by curiosity rather than fear, marking the first step toward recognizing Sada's true power. The queen's curiosity, patient yet insistent, would soon become the catalyst for change, challenging the jealous courtiers, inspiring the servants, and revealing the extraordinary presence of a girl whose voice could not be silenced, even from a cellar. The echoes that had begun as whispers now took on a weight and clarity that could not be ignored. From her hidden place in the cellar, Sada's voice resonated with a purity that seemed to penetrate walls, floors, and even the very hearts of those who heard it. Initially, it was the subtle tremor of sound, like a gentle wind through the palace corridors, that caught the attention of the guards and servants. But soon, the resonance grew stronger, undeniable, carrying not just melody but an almost tangible energy. It was as if the voice itself demanded recognition, justice, and truth, reaching far beyond mere auditory sensation. The palace, built over generations of hierarchy, protocol and calculated control, had never faced a force quite like this. Courtiers who had long wielded power through fear and influence now felt a subtle dissonance whenever Sada's voice filled the halls. Their whispered schemes, carefully orchestrated humiliations, and attempts to assert dominance began to unravel in the presence of something far older, deeper, and purer than politics. The sound itself seemed to illuminate lies, revealing intentions previously hidden behind polite bows and false smiles. It was not just the clarity of the tone that astonished the palace, it was the essence behind it. Every note Sade uttered seemed infused with awareness and purpose. Her voice amplified honesty, exposing deceit, and bringing latent injustices to light. Courtiers who had plotted against her, who had gloated at her humiliation, now found their own actions magnified in their conscience, reflected back through the supernatural resonance. The energy of her voice left them unsettled, unnerved by truths they could no longer deny or hide. Observers in the throne room and adjoining halls began to whisper of the ancient stories they had been taught as children. Tales of blessed individuals whose voices carried the power to reveal justice and purity, who could overturn corruption and restore balance. None had believed them real, dismissing them as myth, yet here was living proof. The magical resonance of Sada's voice was no longer a story, it was undeniable reality, and it demanded attention. Even the servants, long relegated to the margins of palace life, felt the weight of her presence. Those who had silently witnessed her mistreatment felt a strange sense of relief and hope. They understood intuitively that this voice was not merely sound, it was protection, empowerment, and revelation. The power that had been forced into confinement could not be contained. It moved through the palace like a current of light, touching every corner and dispelling shadows of fear and malice. The jealous courtiers who had orchestrated her imprisonment felt the first real tremors of panic. Their meticulous plans, designed to humiliate and control Sade, faltered under the weight of her amplified voice. They could no longer command the narrative. Truth and justice now followed her resonance, and they were powerless against it. Some tried to dismiss it as trickery or acoustical anomaly, but the reaction of the crowd, the gasps of astonishment, the tears of awe, the murmured reverence, made denial impossible. Sade herself, though confined, became aware of the transformation occurring. Each note she sang, each word she spoke, felt imbued with a deeper force. She realized her voice was no ordinary instrument, it carried a connection to something beyond the physical, a spiritual, ancestral, or mystical energy that resonated with the very essence of fairness and righteousness. The echoes bouncing from walls and ceilings did not just move through the air, they penetrated hearts and minds, compelling listeners to confront what they had done, what they had hidden, and what they must now reconcile. By mid-morning, the palace hierarchy was visibly shaken. The king or queen, who had long relied on tradition and protocol to maintain order, now recognized a new variable that could not be predicted or controlled. Sada's voice challenged the status quo, turning fear into reverence, arrogance into humility. The echoes reached even the most secluded chambers, leaving a trail of awe and unease in their wake. Those who had doubted her presence or dismissed her as powerless were forced to acknowledge that Sada's strength lay not in physical might or rank, but in the profound resonance of truth her voice carried. The revelation also had a subtle yet powerful effect on the palace guards and loyal attendants. They sensed that Sada's voice was protective. No ill-intentioned action could occur without being exposed by the resonance. Subconsciously, many found themselves moving more cautiously, acting more justly, and reconsidering their previous complicity in schemes against her. Her voice had become a mirror reflecting not only actions but intentions, holding up the court to its own conscience. By evening, the queen or king convened a private audience with trusted advisors, their expressions a mix of awe, fear, and contemplation. "This is not ordinary talent," the monarch declared, voice steady but tinged with respect. "The resonance of her voice carries judgment and revelation. To ignore it would be folly, yet to suppress it would be impossible. She is a force of truth we cannot contain." The council, who had been skeptical moments before, now realized that Sada's confinement had only served to amplify her latent power, and that the palace's very order was at stake. Thus, the magical and spiritual essence of Sada's voice was fully revealed. It was not merely sound, it was a force that amplified truth, revealed deceit, and unsettled the palace hierarchy. The echoes that had begun in the dark cellar now dominated the palace consciousness, signaling that a new era was dawning. Power was no longer solely in rank or cruelty, it resided in the integrity, purity, and resonance of one young girl's voice, unbroken and undeniable, demanding justice and balance in every corner it touched.